Hello, welcome to Human Tech, a podcast about the intersection between humans and technology. My name is Guthrie. I'm here with Susan. Hello, Susan.
Hey, Guthrie.
Yeah, so today's topic is scenarios, a UX classic, and I should say a UCD classic.
A UX classic. You pronounced them scenarios. That's really interesting. You didn't say scenarios.
So what?
That's interesting.
Okay, so opera.
Opera?
Yes. What do you call an ARIA?
An aria.
Okay, so it's
Scenario. No, I definitely. All right, so we're gonna have this problem.
Like aria.
So we're gonna have this problem all through the rest of this
Scenario?
episode because I'm gonna say scenario and you're gonna say scenario. That's like you say tomato.
I've always for some reason preferred UK spellings of stuff and pronunciations. Not that I do it consistently, but there are definitely.
No, you don't do it consistently.
But there are definitely some. No, not even close. But there are definitely some like I'd still say aluminum.
Like color or behavior.
Well, I like to spell color like the British version.
What do you say?
What? I mean, I just say color.
No, but what was the other thing you said? You like?
Oh, I definitely say aluminum. Like I don't say like aluminium, which is the British pronunciation. I'm not. But there are a couple strange.
Couple of things.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Well,
for sure.
We're going to have an entire podcast episode where we're going to pronounce it differently
Scenarios.
then. But maybe we'll just try
I'll
not
probably
to
switch
use the
back
word.
and forth. I'm probably not
All
consistent at all.
So, do you know, Guthrie, what a scenario is?
Yes, of course I do.
In terms of user experience design.
Nope.
Well, now that we've gotten that out on the table.
First of all, okay.
Yeah.
So I know that there's a UCD process, right?
And do you know what UCD stands for?
User-centered design.
Hey, good.
I'm learning.
All right. So yes, there is you know about user-centered design, and you brought that up because you think that has something to do with scenarios. It's not a trick question. You can just answer the question.
Well, so I'm assuming that. No, how about you just give me the definition? I don't want to sound dumb.
I don't have a definition. I don't have a specific definition in mind. I mean, I can just. I
just
probably
go for it.
Should look that up. Okay. A scenario is a brief description of how you expect your target user group to use your interface that you're designing to get a specific task accomplished.
Okay.
So there are, and I tried to choose my words carefully there, and I may not have done a great job at it, but there are some, to me, there are some very key elements of what was in that definition and what a scenario is and what it isn't. But perhaps we should first talk about, why. Well, you tell me. You want me to go into that in more depth? Do you want me to give an example, or do you want me to talk about why I think scenarios are so critical in the design process?
Let's start there.
Okay. So when you are designing something, and that something can be anything. Let's say when you're designing an experience, right? Whether that's a physical experience in the real world, whether that's a software experience, app experience, any kind of technology experience. you get to this point where you have to do the design. You have to put something on a screen or a page. You have to make a decision about what's going to happen next. And it's very easy to get lost in one of two places. One, you get lost because you're at too high a level in your thinking, and so
which is a problem for a lot of organizations.
You're not thinking clearly about the micro moment. You're thinking about the macro.
Mm-hmm.
Or you get lost in the micro moment, and you're not thinking enough about the context of where the person is and what they're doing and why they're doing it and what happened before and what's going to happen next, because you're just in the micro moment. And we've talked before on another podcast episode, I believe, about micro and macro moments, and they're both important. But what a scenario does is it is in that middle space where it allows you to stay focused on what you're designing right now, but also gives you some context about what else is going on for the user when they're doing this one little thing.
Mm-hmm.
So if you haven't described and mapped out, I'm trying not to use the dreaded word document. If you haven't mapped out the scenarios, if you don't have specific scenarios to work from, it's really easy to get lost, either in macro or in micro. And the quality and the usefulness and the optimization of the interface can suffer. So I have found them in my design work over the years to be extremely useful in that way. And there's another way in which they are useful.
Okay.
Would you like to know what that is?
Does it have something to do with speed?
No.
Oh, okay. Then no.
You don't want to know, or no, you don't know, but
I don't know.
Well, the other way that they're useful is that if you can come together with your team, whoever that is, including like what we like to call the stakeholder, or the person or people who are footing the bill for the project and who you have to make happy, including, and then your other team members and your other designers and developers, or anybody else that you're working with. If all together you guys can agree on what are the 7, 10, 12 most important scenarios for the user, then you have, I mean, that is just such a huge thing. When you've done that, and we'll talk, I'll give some examples of what a scenario is.
I was going to say, you should definitely do that, because that'll definitely be useful.
But so I'll do that in a moment. But when you have your set of scenarios done, you've pretty much mapped out what's the most important stuff that needs to get designed in order for this product to be a success. So it's a wonderful way to get at that, a really practical way, and it just serves you for the whole rest of the project if you nail those scenarios. So I consider the scenarios really critical to the design process. So you want an example, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I'll make one up on the spot here. Do you want to give me a software or app or experience example?
Yes.
Okay.
How broad or specific do I need to be?
Well, just give me one, and I'll tell you if it's too broad or too specific.
Give me one. What?
Give me the thing we're designing that I'm gonna give you an example scenario for. Like, is it like
Yeah. Okay. I got it.
What are we designing?
I got it.
Yeah.
I'm designing the corporate site for a large coal company.
You are.
We do coal.
You do coal.
And
you mine coal or what?
All of it. Yeah, we mine it.
You're coal.
We sell it.
Process
we ship it.
Sell it. Whatever you do, you're coal.
You know, when you think coal, think us.
Okay, so an example scenario. So scenarios assume.
Was that decent?
That's really big. So I'm going to bring it down.
Okay, that's too
assume.
broad.
No, that's all right. Scenarios assume a particular target audience or audiences. And one of the things we can talk about before we're done, if you want, is how you map your target audiences, if you have more than one, with your scenarios. I call it the target audience scenario matrix. But it does assume that there's a particular target audience. So you gave me you're developing the website. Is this the website? The corporate website?
Yeah.
For this coal company.
Yes.
And so now could you, in order for me to come up with an example of a scenario, can you give me, tell me what one of the target audiences is?
We have a lot of target audiences.
Well, just pick one for.
We at the coal company, we need the best and brightest, and so we definitely want people to, we have trouble attracting young, interesting talent to come move to Western Pennsylvania, where we have our corporate headquarters, and we want people to. We want these people to be excited about the prospects of their future in coal.
Okay.
And apply for a job.
All right. So one of the target audiences then is someone who might be interested in a job.
Yes.
And is coming to the website in order to, perhaps in response to a particular ad they saw, on one of the recruitment sites or whatever, right? So now if we're talking about a scenario, a scenario, as I said, involves a particular target audience, and it involves them doing a particular thing with the product after it has been redesigned or designed. All right. So now we're going to assume that we have this wonderful place at the website where people who are interested in working for a company are going to land for however they got there.
Mm-hmm.
And there's something that they want to do. So an example scenario might be Jean is interested in finding out about a particular job opportunity at Coal Is Us company that he heard about, and so he clicks on a link that takes him to a job description for that position. He reads, he checks out the job description, and then also decides to get some background about the company. And after he's done those two things, he decides to go ahead and apply for the job.
Okay.
So that's a scenario.
How are scenarios different from personas?
Okay. Actually, not exactly the question I thought you were going to ask next, but that's a good one. So a persona describes the person. A persona would tell us about Gene. Like, does he know anything about the company? Has he worked in coal before? Is he just out of college, or is he an experienced, worker in the industry? How old is he? What's important to him in looking for a career? And so on. So personas describe the target audience. Scenarios they do assume that somebody knows what target audience Gene is with and all that stuff, knows that there is a persona that exists. Scenarios, instead of describing Gene, who Gene is, they describe what Gene is going to do with the product to accomplish a particular goal, which in this case we could call it the check out and apply for a job scenario.
Right.
And so that's the difference between a persona and a scenario.
Okay.
What other question do you have for me?
Oh, do continue.
Well, I thought you were going to ask me what's the difference between a scenario and a task analysis.
No, I was not going to. I don't know. I feel like that actually is a better question.
No, these are all good questions. But
okay, what's the difference between a scenario and a task analysis?
I'm so glad you asked. Okay, a task analysis is where you would take a scenario. So when I gave you that scenario, right, I don't remember exactly what I said, but, Gene has heard about the job at this company. He's interested in checking it out. He goes to the website, blah, 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 right? The description I gave you was what, maybe 5-6 sentences long, short paragraph.
Mm-hmm.
And that was it. So I didn't tell you about exactly what he clicks on first. I didn't tell you that he scrolls down. I didn't tell you that he looks at the list of all the positions and then chooses one and then looks at that and then goes back and picks another one. I didn't tell you that when he finds a position he likes, he fills out the form and attaches his resume, right? I mean, I didn't say all that stuff. I just told you at a very high level what Gene wants to do when he goes to the website to check out a possible job. It's a much higher level. Task analysis is that detail level. Task analysis is, okay, what is the likelihood that
you're analyzing the tasks that
pardon?
You're analyzing the tasks that have to happen?
Yeah, and you're describing the order in which they happen. You're describing the likelihood. I mean, we should do another podcast episode on task analysis, and we will. I promise we will, because it's actually one of my favoriteest topics.
Really?
Oh, yeah. I can totally, get very nerdy about all this stuff. And did you say really, like, facetiously? Or were you really asking? You're not even sure.
I'm not even sure.
Well, I mean, we teach. I have taught classes, and we have an online video class on how to do all this stuff. We have one that's on user research, which is about personas, scenarios, and task analysis, among other things. So we go into this stuff in great detail. But I'd love to do a podcast episode about task analysis. But task analysis is at a much more detailed level. And that's important too, and we can talk about why that's important and why you need to go to that level. But we'll save that for another episode, unless we run out of things to talk about scenarios, and then we can talk in more detail about task analysis.
I think we'll make it.
But it's a really important distinction that scenarios are at a higher level. So they're at this in-between level. I mean, because it wouldn't be enough if you just said, People are going to go to the website and look for a job.
Okay.
But that's not enough. That doesn't give me, doesn't tell me who which person is doing this, and it just doesn't give me enough information about what they are expecting. So it's got a little bit more detail, but then it doesn't have so much detail that I'm going to get bogged down in all the detail. Because what I want to be able to do is I want to have this set of scenarios. Like I said, 5, 7, 10, 12 scenarios that when I look at all of those scenarios, I know what are the main things that people want to do with this product, and what are the main things that I have to make sure that those things in particular are really optimized for that audience. And I want to be able to see that, kind of at a glance. Like I'd like to, if someone wrote the 5, 7, 10, 12 scenarios on a big whiteboard in the room, we could look at them all at the same time,
Yeah.
Which if you had a detailed task analysis for each one of those, you couldn't look at it all at the same time.
No, you're a big proponent of working in large spaces with other people with physical object, paper note cards and sticky notes.
I am, and the reason I am is that in my experience, what makes for a successful design or a successful, let's back up. What makes, and I've trained and worked with thousands of UX/UI designers over the years. I mean, really, it's literally thousands. And I've worked with people who were just beginning. I've worked with experts that had been doing this for decades. I've worked with people who are really good at it and people who, frankly, weren't very good at it. And I've thought about this a lot. And one of the things that makes for a really good UX designer is, and this actually, I heard someone talk about the fact that this is actually a trait of people who are highly creative in general, the ability to zoom in and out between the detail and the high level constantly, to zoom in and work on something really small and detailed, and then to zoom back out and look at it at a high level, and then go back in, and then go back out, and in and out, and in and out. And if you can't do that very well, either because you're just the kind of person that doesn't like that back and forth, or you're the kind of person that isn't very good at the back and forth, or because you don't have the tools that allow you to go back and forth like that, if you can't do that, you're not going to have a very good design. And what these physical tools, like the whiteboard space or the cards or anything else, they make that much easier. I mean, if I have to just hold that all in my head, I can't, right? We know that we're limited. We know that we can only deal with 3 or 4 things at a time. And I'm probably I might have more than 3 scenarios. So I can't just hold them in my brain. Plus, even if I could, I'm doing other things with the scenarios. I'm talking to someone, I'm thinking about design, I'm sketching. So even, it's just not going to work to just hold it in my memory. On the other hand, if I have it in a document, on the screen in front of me and I have to scroll, it's not there in front of me, right? I have to do something to bring it back up. So If you have them on note cards and they're laying out on the table in front of you, then you have them readily available. If you have them on a whiteboard, they're readily available. You need all of them. You need to literally be able to see all of them at the same time. Now, obviously, your central vision isn't going to focus on all of them at the same time, but you need them there so that you can quickly scan, look at one, look at another, look at another. It's really, it's these little things that can make a big difference in the quality of your design and your ability to stay focused and still zoom out. Yeah, I'm a huge believer in setting up your environment for that. I mean, some of the best designs I've ever done were done because the team was able to take over, sometimes called a war room, right? We were able to take over a big conference room for a period. Yeah, that's what that's what it's great. Called. That's what it's called, right?
I know.
Yeah, take over a war room for several weeks, if not several days / weeks / months, depending on how big a project it was. Meaning we could leave our stuff up, and the walls would just be covered, with the whiteboard would be covered, and there'd be, large sheets of paper taped up, and as we documented our personas and our scenarios and, task analysis or anything else, and so that it was always available in the room. And that's where we did our design. We met there to do our design, and that's some of the best work that I've ever done or I've ever seen other people do is when you can have that around you.
Well, so I mean, because I just want to talk briefly. I think the biggest problem people have with the UCD process in general, from an outsider looking in, is that generally they find that there's no time for it. No time, no budget, no energy. And I think a big reason is that, especially in a large corporation or corporate structure, the ability to have all the correct people in the room with all the relevant information that they need in front of them at the same time, so they can do that in and out, it's near impossible to do. And then it just gets floundered in corporate purgatory forever. And then it just never goes anywhere. And then they're like, oh, well, it doesn't work.
Well, and I think
we're switching to Agile.
Yeah, right. Although Agile requires that you get the team together as well.
Well, that's why it works because like, but it's like part of the rules. Like, you can't do Agile unless everyone is like, like there's
unless you can
Agile
get the team
canon,
together. Yeah,
right? Like as integral part of the Agile process is basically force smashing people together in ways that can break corporate culture structure, which is why I think it's so, in some organizations, it works so well. And UCD, it's user-centered design.
Yes.
And it really should be SCD, which is structure-centered design.
I don't know.
No, because UCD, the whole thing is about the user, but it's not about the process of coming up with that.
That's true.
And so if you have a bad process, then you never get to the user.
Well, and it's interesting because I think one of the things that developed somewhere along the way was this idea that you should. I'm trying to remember who advertises this, but you have a workshop to do the design, and you get everyone together. Right, and you're going to do it in 3 days or 5 days, and when you're done, you're going to have the whole thing, designed and prototyped and even tested. And basically it's like, well, that's nothing new. That's just getting the team together. To me, it was like, yeah, of course, you're going to get the team together and you're going to work on it. I mean, I get, does it have to be done in 5 days? I don't know. But yeah, and you don't always have to have the whole team together. But certainly if you had personas and you had scenarios, and, individuals could work on task analyses, individuals could work on prototyping and then come back. But there is this, but there really, there's nothing that really replaces getting a team together, a small team at least, and agreeing on what are these scenarios. And I think that's critical, because the fights that you get into later are because someone, typically someone who's important and who has like a stakeholder or has a say in what happens, someone wasn't involved in an early process and is essentially coming up with a new scenario or disagreeing with a scenario. I mean, even if you don't have scenarios done, that's really what's going on.
Yeah.
And I just find, as you're going through the design process, it's funny because I think people forget why we do and the stuff we do during the design process. It's almost like they think you're just supposed to do it. Like there's a set of physical laws that say you must go through this process, and so that's why you go through them, because it's or you'll go to jail if you don't or something. But the process is to protect you and help you from yourself. The process is to prevent problems like, right before the product is due to be released, an important person says, but that's not, we don't need that. What we need instead is this. And then you're back at square one. I mean, that, that's, you don't want that. So if you've taken what could be a few minutes, it could be more, but it doesn't have to take a long time to come up with the scenarios, and everyone agrees that those are the important scenarios, that'll prevent a lot of problems later on. And it's not to say that you can't adjust the scenarios, like you realize that you left one out, or you realize that these two are really the same and let's merge them, or you can do that as well. It's not like they're cast in stone and can't be changed, but just the fact that you have them is extremely helpful. So one of the things I like to do when people are, and to me, scenarios are like easy. I've done a gazillion of them. But then when I teach classes and I have people come up with scenarios, they get, it's really interesting to me what they don't get it initially. So what would you guess, Guthrie, are some of the pitfalls? What are some of the things that people do wrong when they're creating a scenario?
They create a task analysis.
Yeah, they have way too much detail in there. Yep. Or they don't specify, which target audience it is. Or it's too general, right? Mm-hmm. Or they never say what here's one that I get a lot. They never say exactly what the person is doing with the product. Like they'll tell you all about Gene, Gene is an experienced engineer. He's, worked this, blah, 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 blah. He likes a job with a lot of challenge. It's like, but they never get to the point where they say what he's going to do with the product you're designing. Like, that's really important. What is that interaction? What is that, what is he doing when he comes to use this product, or even, like I said, a physical space, right? It doesn't have to be a product. You could be doing scenarios for, designing a museum or a store or something.
Mm-hmm.
But they never get to that part. So you know all about Gene and what's important to him, but you don't have any information on what he's going to do when he gets there. So that's another mistake that people make. What other mistakes do people make with scenarios? That's probably, they describe how people do it now, like with the current product they're using instead of the new one you're designing.
Mm-hmm.
And that there's a place for that, by the way. That's called a current task analysis as opposed to an optimized task analysis. But that's not a scenario. So, all right. Now, there's another big mistake that people make with scenarios. And I'm going to bet you can't guess what this is. Do you want to even try?
No.
Come on, I gave you a challenge.
Okay, so give me the question then.
All right, we've been talking about some of the mistakes or errors that people make when they're writing up their scenarios that then make the scenarios less helpful in design.
Mm-hmm.
And we've talked about too much detail and about what the person's doing, so it's really a task analysis. We've talked about not enough detail. We've talked about the fact that they describe the current situation, not the future. We've talked about the fact that they never get around to describing how the person is actually going to interact with the product you're designing. There's one other big mistake that people make, and I wondered if you knew what it was. And I'm going to give you a hint.
Okay.
This mistake is particularly prevalent if the people in the room working on the scenarios are developers, programmers, people who actually implement, create products, not just design them. That's a big hint. Let's see if you can guess so what is the mistake that people make?
They try and shoehorn what exists or what can be made into what the scenario is.
No, actually, that's not what I was thinking, but that's a good one. That's another error.
Thank you.
Yeah, but that's not what I was thinking of.
That's they
Yes.
I don't know.
You want me to save you?
Yeah.
They describe what the system is going to do rather than what the human is going to do.
I think that's what I said.
Oh, you did?
Is that like they maybe
I thought
explain what that means.
Well, okay, so if you think about the example scenario I gave you, right? Gene is interested in finding out about possible job at the coal at We Are Coal. He goes to the website through a URL that he found at another site and looks at the possible jobs and decides to apply for one online. Okay? So I'm basically telling you what Gene is doing. Now, implied in that is all kinds of stuff that the, computer is doing, that the code is doing, that the software program is doing. But I don't describe any of that.
Oh, I think I see the distinction. Okay.
Yeah, and this is also this is maybe even more important when you get into task analysis. But it's a really common thing in scenarios for people to go off, and so they might say things like, Gene comes to the website, and the site shows him a list of jobs, and he chooses a job, and then the site filters blah, 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 and shows him the blah, blah, blah job description. And then, he enters his ID and password, and the system verifies whether he's been in the system before, right? And the system checks to see if his resume is on file, right? Do you see where I'm going? Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I'm getting into more detail than you would in a scenario, but
so we did say the same thing, but essentially you're constraining yourself to the realities of the situation, which is a developer centric process versus
yes. Well, and that, but see, to me that's slightly different, because that to me those are two different things. There's the idea of I could write a scenario and you could say, oh, well, we can't do that. We can't do that. Like, our technology won't let us do that. And that's what I thought you were saying, which is also another error. It could be an error. I mean, you have to decide how much you want to be constrained by the current. But then an additional error is that you veer off from talking about what the user is doing, and you start talking about what the system is doing. And that's there's all kinds of assumptions. What I usually say to people is, look, there's all kinds of assumptions in these scenarios about what the system can or can't do, will do, won't do. And that's all really critical, but not now, and not for this group.
And that's why all the I mean, and I think that is some of the reason why when the UX person walks into the room, all the developers glare at them. Right? Right?
Yeah,
that's like the thing,
absolutely.
right? They're like, okay, so they're going to come in and then there'll be like this thing, and the developers are like, well, there's like no system for that, and how are we going to code that?
Right.
We don't,
absolutely.
There's no back end, and that would require, we're going to need an API, and like, it's like a whole, right?
And that's all. And I'm not saying it's not important. That there's so many levels on which there's so many things that are within that statement you just said. So first of all, when you're designing scenarios or task analysis or any of the stuff, sketching, prototyping, any of it, you have to make a decision at the beginning. Are we doing blue sky, or are we doing working with reality and constraints as we know them? And there's something to be said for both. So there are times. So before we do scenarios, I will always ask that question. It's like, are we, can we, do we have to work with the existing constraints as they are now known? Or in this exercise, do you want to have a little more freedom so that we can see what an optimal situation would be, and then we'll work back from that. And so you have to decide that. And there's advantages and disadvantages to both. Believe it or not, I don't mind working with constraints. I mean, the research shows that people actually are more creative with some constraints than they are with no constraints at all. So I don't mind, some constraints. And that's why I want the, people who know the constraints in the room, right? Mm-hmm. So that we can say, is this possible? Is it impossible? Is it possible but, expensive? Like what, how far off the rails have we gone here? And then somebody at some point, and it's not me, it should be a business stakeholder, has to make
someone else.
I'm the designer. Someone has to, if I am veering off what they want to do, they have to say, nope, we're not doing that. On the other hand, you're right. It's really easy to just sit there and say no, 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 and sometimes you got to push a little. So that's a whole, that's a whole nother dynamic going on. Mm. But you don't want you don't want, when you're doing, either way, you don't want the scenario to devolve into what the system is doing, whether it's the constrained system or a free system. You don't want that. That's not what the scenario is. And the reason this used to get confused, and I think it might not be as bad now, is because of something that was around for a very long time, and I don't know how much it's still in use now, and it's called a use case scenario.
I know you like those.
Oh, no, I don't like those.
Oh, you don't like them?
No, use case scenarios? No. They were the bane of my existence.
Oh,
many
okay.
Years ago. So what? All right. So everybody thinks that agile is like new. Agile's not new. Many years ago, there was a whole design process called Rational. It was actually software called Rational, based around the design process called Rational. I didn't think it was very rational, but and it was all about. It was largely a precursor to what we think of as agile now. But it was really a very important part of it was use case scenarios, which might still be part of the work that's going on. I don't know. If you guys are using use case scenarios out there, you got to let me know. So use case scenarios were very, very specific descriptions of the interaction between the system and the interface, I guess you would say. And they really are about both what's going on behind the screens and behind the scenes and what's going on the screen. And but typically they're very small. So let's say that at this point in the interaction, the user is supposed to put in their name and address. Let's just use that as an example, right? Mm-hmm. So, a use case scenario would go something like, the user inputs their first name and the system checks to make sure that there were only alpha characters were input, and then the user enters their last name and blah blah blah, and then the user enters their street address, and every time the user does something, the system does something, and either checks something or returns information back, right? You have this back and forth between what the user is doing and what the system is doing. And you would describe this, and that would be called a use case scenario. And you'd have a use case scenario for entering name and address. You'd have a use case scenario for bringing up the list of possible jobs with filtering, right? I mean, the infinite number of use case scenarios that any particular product would have. And a part of design and development was to make sure that you had identified all these use case scenarios and worked through them all before or as you were programming. And the problem is that those use case scenarios involve partly what's going on in the interface, right? They involve the user experience. And so you'd want a user experience person, involved in that. But then they also had all the system stuff in, which the user experience person doesn't know about, didn't need to really deal with. And then you had the problem you had was that people were confusing that phrase use case scenario with what I call a scenario. So that became a real problem. So sometimes people will call what I'm calling a scenario, they call it a user story, or it got confusing. Because I would say, for instance, I'd like to develop some scenarios, and they would answer, we have scenarios. We have use case scenarios. But I had a very shortcut way to find out if they really had scenarios or whether they were use case scenarios. Do you know what that is?
What's that?
I would ask them, if they said, we've already done scenarios, I would say, how many do you have? and they would say like 532. And that would tell me that they had use case scenarios and not user scenarios.
Right.
Because there's no way I'm going to have 532 scenarios.
Yeah.
I'm going to have like 10.
Yeah. Yeah, so, it's tough because I think the reason that happens is that otherwise they're not exactly, it's like how is this useful to me?
Yeah. I mean, first of all, use case scenarios, as I said, I don't know if people still use them. They seem to be very useful to the development team back then. But you're right? You mean the development team is asking, how are these scenarios useful to me?
Right. Yeah. Like this is. It just right. Like so on one hand, the company's trying to tie everyone together.
Yeah.
But it's so funny because that's kind of like the end goal, right? Is that you basically have like the dev team and the UX team like working in this beautiful like ballet harmony.
Yes.
But large parts of the UCD process completely cut out the dev team, and then it's switched.
And vice versa.
And now with Agile, large parts of the Agile process completely cut out the UX team.
Yeah.
So it's like this is it's like everyone wants these two to dance together, but
I don't think that's a problem. I mean, there's lots of things that developers do that the UX people do not need to be involved in. There's a lot of things the UX people do that developers don't need to be involved in. I mean, I think that's okay. What's really critical are, do you have these juncture points where people are collaborating or not? And if you don't have them, if you have too many of them, then you're wasting everybody's time. If you don't have enough of them, then you lose the collaboration and the communication. So, and I think that's why it's so tricky. One reason it's so tricky to come up with a UX process that works with Agile, but that is absolutely another topic that we will get to one of these days. As we continue to work on
our list.
Yeah. But that same problem though is true, for all the way through anything you're doing with UX, because you're assuming that somebody somewhere along the line has to make this thing happen, right? Has to bring this thing from sketch or prototype to reality. You're going to have that. Now, I'm kind of curious about what's going to happen when, the machines start doing all the development. And, I mean, I think the scenarios are a great input to the machines. But we'll see if I'm proved.
Well, of course, you're assuming that machines are going to be taking over the design process as well.
I do assume that. I think the machines are going to be taking over almost all of it.
In which case, then it actually might be best for the machines to work in a use case scenario world, because they can handle 600. They can handle all of it at the same time.
I still think there'd be a place for just the scenarios. Even
feeding it to AI.
Especially feeding it to AI. If I'm going to feed it, I don't want to. If I'm feeding it to AI, I don't want to be deciding at all what the system's going to be doing. I just want, I'm hoping the AI will be smart enough to ask me some pertinent questions, and interestingly, I think one of the biggest challenges with AI, especially if we're talking about having AI do our design and development, is going to be to figure out how to translate human emotions, goals, and preferences into a language what that there's this bridge between, what people want from an emotional, human, non-logical point of view, right? And we somehow have to figure out how to communicate that to a machine that doesn't understand human emotion. And that, to me, that's one of the, I think, one of the more interesting challenges.
And I think that's why use cases, because a couple things. First, you're assuming that a machine needs to do that, and I'm not so sure about that.
Well, you mean like because the human's going to do that?
No. Oh my God, no.
Oh,
no,
well, then
but,
what?
So basically, here's how I envision stuff. So the human says to the robot, "Hey, we need a website for X," right? And gives them a couple use case scenarios. The
scenarios or use case scenarios?
Use case scenarios. The AI creates the backend on the fly because it's AI to fit whatever the use case scenario is that it's given. And then it goes and then at the same time instantly does like 1 trillion hypothetical A/B tests given the personas that it created to determine the most successful one. And then it goes to a human and the human's like, "Oh, can you make this a little friendlier?" And just changes the tone, and then it does it on the fly, creates the whole new backend, and runs the trillion A/B tests at the instantaneously to then come up.
So
with a
you
better
think
product.
that we will have codified what friendlier means enough?
My point is that it doesn't need to know. It only needs to know. It only needs a testing ground.
True.
To then run simulated A/B tests with like you could have, for example, you could put a repository of 1 million hypothetical people together.
Yeah.
And each ones have different attributes.
Yeah.
And then you just run and so you have 1 million bots that are running in parallel on some supercomputer. And then you just run A/B tests with the 1 million bots to come up with the most successful iteration. And I should probably make that a business and create quadrillions of dollars.
No kidding. Can we work on that?
Yeah, sure. You write that down on a piece of paper.
Can I just give it to my robot?
No, unfortunately, you have to write that down on a piece of paper.
No, that's really interesting. That's really interesting. And I think some of the, I think some of the most interesting work in our field of, if we talk about our field being this intersection between people and computers, is what you just described. How do we go about doing this? So that, I mean, and I'm excited and I dread it, right? I mean, how do we go about doing this so that machines can do all the design? And on the one hand, I'm looking forward to it because it's interesting, and on the other hand, I'm like, shoot, what are we all going to do?
Right.
What's I mean, I think that right now, I teach courses at University of Wisconsin in the Human Technology Interaction Department to people who are going to be, who are planning on having a career designing human technology interaction, and I'm not convinced there's going to be a career there for them.
Oh, I think they'll be compared to truck driver, or
okay, truck driver might go earlier, but
I'm just saying, like in the list of
these are
careers,
20-year-olds, they 40 years from now.
Yeah, well,
40 years from now, is there going to be a designer? No.
Hey, we're making a lot of assumptions that we know what the world is going to look like, and
you're right.
Obviously things will change. Things will change, some things will stay the same. And that's
all right.
That's okay.
Well, so hopefully I've helped you understand a little more what scenarios are and why they're important.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. All right. So you go build the robot. And yeah, I'd love to hear from people about what they think about all of this scenario stuff, if they use them, if they find them useful. So Guthrie, if someone wants to write in and tell us about this,
anything,
what should they do?
Info. Oh my god. Email info@theteamw.com.
Yeah.
You can give out your Twitter if you like. We're also on Instagram.
@thebrainlady.
You can go to theteamw.com and check out stuff.
Yeah.
Also, we're booking workshops for 2018. So if you...
We are.
Yeah. If you want to do one of our workshops on site, just give us a call.
Yeah, we're booking that now. We have some openings, and if you act fairly quickly, then you might actually get me teaching it, if you can get in there on the calendar before it gets too filled up with stuff. So there you have it. Guthrie, thanks so much.
Yep. Thank you as well.
Bye.
Bye.